Hello, I'm on now. It's the long-awaited video about your second week discussion. And what I've done is I copied everything off. I went through and annotated it. I'm going to basically assorted them out in categories, and so I'm trying to. Um, the, the discussions are superb in this class. Um, this is not an ESL class, but you obviously, because of your nature teaching, you deal with immigrant refugee kids in your school, kids diverse backgrounds. And I made one category in here. I put a little star by them, words. And I had mentioned about not using controversial words. I had a lot of fun. I was actually hungry at the time, and you guys were talking about melting pot, and some of you talked about salad, and you just started describing various soups, and I was almost starved to death before I could leave as I was reading through those. But it was like a cornucopia or what is it? It was like a buffet was being served. But words matter a lot, and you hit on some really important points in here. And I thought of some while I was reading. One of those was the word tolerance, and Taylor Wusk, you mentioned that you're talking to, that you weren't a fan of the word tolerance, and like I had mentioned that too. To tolerate someone is not very positive. So that's a word I don't usually use to try to make things look better. And I thank you, Grace, you mentioned about I said use undocumented or with it, sin papeles, sin documentos, whatever that means in Spanish, without documents, rather than say illegal, because illegal is, once you declare someone illegal, it tends to smear all over them. So they're illegal, so you can do anything to them, and they're just as bad as any criminal who ever lived. So that just gets ridiculous. So, and I appreciate that. And I got another one from Joanne talking about words that we should use. And I thought of another one when I was looking at Becky Dunn's. It came across the word privilege. And I don't think you would use that word, Becky, but it was the word privilege really upsets people when you tell them that, you have white privilege, or so-called white privilege would be whatever the dominant group is in any country. When they have the privilege, they use it. If you're in India, you might say Hindus would be privileged. But if I were to say that, that word could, in that situation, just upset people. People feel they've got what they've earned and they deserve to be where they are. And the word privilege says, oh, you're putting yourself above people. And even if they are putting themselves above people, you don't want to try that. So anytime that you hear a discussion on TV and somebody says, well, you enjoy white privilege, or you enjoy some kind of special, undeserved, you're on a pedestal, whatever, that always upsets people. So I think a lot about those, because those words just absolutely backfire on you. And one thing I want to mention when talking about various words is you think about, this is a mindset that I think is very important, is that when you're dealing with difficult situations, difficult people, you don't care for them, but you have to think mercifully that they are different than you. They have an attitude you may not like, but I don't want to be too schmaltzy about it, but your job is to care for them and to want to enlighten them, but to do it in a way that you're not talking down to them. And that's not easy to do. I think as I looked at some of these, I think one of the big things you need to do is engineer or design your classes, your readings and stuff to where it's obvious what you're trying to get across to them, your goal. But you may have reading books where people develop empathy. If someone reads To Kill a Mockingbird, they'll reach, hopefully that book will affect their hearts, and they'll think about the treatment of African Americans in the South. That's why that's a powerful book. Is it um, um, it puts you in a position as the reader of being empathetic to someone, and it happens to be someone they normally may not be empathetic with. And that could be whatever kind of situation, whether they're minority, whether they're um, a woman suffering through abuse, or a person being persecuted for their sexual orientation, or a person who's just an outsider for whatever reason, you know. That's why I always think in the Bible, the story about the Good Samaritan. Some of you, if you know that story, if you study it completely, you know Samaritans were not liked by whatever the group was in Jerusalem. I don't know, the different Jewish sects, sects, and that Samaritans had a different viewpoint on religion. And so they were outsiders and people didn't like them. There was a lot of division there. But the point of the story is that the word Samaritan was a negative word. And so the guy that did the good deed was an outsider, and he looked after the man who was injured and been beaten up. So that teaches a positive attitude toward the Samaritans. For a long time, I thought, well, Samaritan, that must mean a really good person. But go back in time, and it wasn't. The purpose of the story is it taught a lesson that someone that normally may be discriminated against and disliked is actually can be seen as a good person. And that gets into that area. I also wrote some down on morality, and forgive me, I tried to organize this so I would get my thoughts to you. But the thing on morality that really struck me, I have to bring this up now. It's Taylor had mentioned in here that each group, religion, and person brings their own special value to the table, and those values should be honored because I do not have the same value as the next person or that person, but that does not mean my values are less important, but I honor both of our beliefs. So I think that very, very good statement from Taylor is that there's a moral position. And when I teach multicultural stuff, whatever word we use for that, whatever word we use for differences, that we're both trying to change people's hearts, but we're not saying that you always have to examine your own beliefs and stuff, but you don't have to give up who you are. That's why I don't like melting pot. We don't all melt into some amalgam of whatever was there before. But we shouldn't fear to know about others and to care about others and to learn about their positions on things. I may strongly disagree with them. It doesn't mean I have to hate them. And it doesn't mean I have to agree with them either, I know I like the one about Nicole mentioned her brother's kids playing with a little girl from Guatemala or a girl from Guatemala. I'm not sure if they're dating or anything, but the point is that the kids, they saw each other for who they are. And I think Annika mentioned this, that in Sweden, that you asked a kid, well, you're trying to tell which of their friends are which, and you do a physical description, their skin's darker or something, and the child didn't think in terms of skin color. That was just incredibly beautiful. You ask the little child, well, your friend, and you try to describe their friend because you think you may, an outsider will look and say, well, they look different than you. And so you try to describe the differences, and the child doesn't connect to their friend because of their differences. The child doesn't see skin color. But you'd think that would be obvious, but that's an adult concept. Tells you a lot about how society teaches negative stuff to kids. Kids don't start out seeing differences like that. They're not preoccupied. That's a learned thing. But anyhow, that's very beautiful. And I also want to mention that really touched me is Valeria's statement about that teacher that told the class not to talk to you when you were 6 years old. And the teacher announced to the class no one was to talk to me, play with me, or look at me. Oh my, It's horrible. That really disturbed me. I'm so sorry, Valeria. That made me nearly cry. I mean, I can't imagine a child being treated that way it's age 6. But that and some other things, I'm just going to pick these up and go through them. One of them was on hard work, and this was in Carrie Williamson. You mentioned how hard a work it is. And somebody else up in Dakota City, I forget, and Gibbon, Emily Jones, talking about Gibbon, how hard it is to work in the slaughter plant, the blood, the stink, getting that all over your clothes, on your body, and that comes home with you, and how many people, how much money comes in the community because our nation likes steak. And tell you a little story about myself. I went through they used to give us tours through IBP, which is now Tyson over in Lexington. And I remember walking through, you could see the lines of people, and they were all in different places. Some of them had a knife and they were cutting meat off a bone, literally called deboners, I think they call it. These people would tear up their wrists because hitting with a knife like that is not a normal thing to do 8 hours a day, and eventually tears up your wrist. Carpal tunnel syndrome, all kinds of workman comp deals. But you see that, and then I went through this warm side where they do the slaughter, and I saw things that bothered me. I saw a skin ripped completely off a cow. The cow was dead, but I think it was hanging upside down, and the skin was ripped off and the hide was put in so they could make car seats and briefcases. But literally it was stripped off in 7 seconds, like you'd hang me upside down, rip my sweater off. That was skin of the animal, whatever they had to do to loosen it. They had these things on there. It looked like some nightmarish torture. But after I went through that and smelled all that, I never ate beef again. And that's serious. I don't eat beef. I just couldn't do it. And I lived on a farm and ate steak, and now I just don't eat beef. Not pepperoni, not even a sliver. I do eat pork because I haven't been to a pork slaughter plant, but not too much. I'm pretty much a vegetarian in many ways. Never cared for fish. But the hard work is something that is very important if you're teaching kids to understand, be empathetic with other people. Show them the kind of work they do and how hard it is. I get tired of hearing people say, so-and-so's up here and they're taking our jobs. Well, guess what? They're not walking into the accounting firm and taking accounting jobs. They're cleaning hotel rooms. They're doing janitorial work. They're doing all kinds of work that is dirty and disgusting. Things that you landscaping, digging, working in bad weather, things that, for instance, a lot of farmers do because they have to do it because farmers work with animals. But a lot of people aren't farmers anymore, very few of them. I had a chance. I'm not a farmer. You know, I didn't want to go out there with calves in freezing weather, calving, or cows calving. You know, I saw that a couple of times and I was ready to go to college. Okay. But there's such richness in your statements. Here's one, Taylor Wusk, you mentioned about that they're not taking our jobs, they're taking the hard jobs. Then some other things that came up, they're just kind of odds and ends. I'm trying to look at some of these. See, this one I already mentioned about Annika talking about trying to describe some little kid's friend because they look different and the little kid didn't see skin color. I really like this Micah, I said that incorrectly, I'm sorry, about Ogallala, and I just got to get over to Ogallala. They just have all kinds of fun things over there. A lot of times I discover stuff in Nebraska that I haven't participated in. Of course, I didn't grow up in Nebraska. I grew up in Missouri, but I didn't participate in their history either. I stayed in my own little county and didn't travel very much. So I was very similar to a lot of people in Nebraska. So I see their viewpoint when they don't understand other cultures. What are some other things here? Well, I thought it was interesting. Cassie mentioned that she didn't know that Christopher Columbus was such an awful man. And I have to give you a little background on this about Christopher Columbus. Part of the reason Hispanics have had negative viewpoints of English speakers of Hispanics go all the way back to the wars between Spain and England, religious wars and national wars. And Spain, I don't know if you know your history, but in 1588, the King of Spain put a huge armada together and tried to invade England. And the English defeated that armada, but England was definitely on the fearful end. They were afraid that Spain would come in and wipe out all the Protestants. And this was because Henry VIII, who technically made England Protestant, but he wasn't a religious man. He just killed his wives and wanted to have all the money to himself. So don't look for any virtue in most of these players because they weren't standing on principle, they were standing on cash. And he had dumped his first wife, the daughter, I think, of the King of Spain, or sister, because she didn't bear a male child, and he wanted to divorce her. And of course, he made a habit of eliminating his wives one way or the other. So Christopher Columbus got a bad rap, and he did a lot of evil things. But I would ask you to understand that when you encounter people in another place and you go there, your first interaction is going to be very violent, probably. They're not, and if not that, the germs you bring with you, the viruses, either they'll kill you or you'll kill them. And that's what basically happened to Native Americans all over the Western Hemisphere, is that the very fact they'd been isolated from Europe, and when these two came together, most of the illnesses killed the natives. But that's always a risk. It's like if we ever explore Mars or some planet where there are actually people or life forms, even if there's nothing intelligent life, we don't know what's going to happen. We may come back with something that wipes us out. You never know. That's biology. Micah made another cool response. She talked about the tone of voice. That's something culturally we don't talk about. Mode of communication, loudness of voice, physical distance to people. Do you get too close? I know some cultures, when I was at Oklahoma State, certain Middle Eastern groups, when they would talk to people, they talked very close. And I always thought, why are they getting close? I don't like that. You're violating my space. And we only violate space if it's with children or loved ones. They can't get right up close to us. It gets weird. But some cultures, you don't even shake hands, or you don't physically touch. A man and a woman don't shake hands unless they're close relatives. So those are little issues that came up. One that was really interesting, Andy brought this up. You brought up about that sometimes people send their kids and they're alone going to school in the United States. Maybe they have a guardian or something. I've heard of latchkey kids, but people do this. People from Syria send their kids alone. I think Annika said this, to Sweden, just so they can get them out of war zones, to get them to safety. Think about that. Issues of translating. There was a mention in here, and I don't have who wrote this, but about people mentioning that young kids do a pretty good job translating. I would remind you to try to always get a professional or at least an adult translator. Schools initially just used whoever they could, but the problem is if you have issues of personal, if the kid's in trouble with the principal, you don't want to bring in other kids and let them find out what's going on and use them as translators. So if you can, what you always want to do is get a translator. Now, for Spanish, that's not such an issue, but if you had to find a Czech translator, you had to find a Chinese translator, you might end up using somebody who may not translate very well or may not keep their mouth shut, and you really don't want to bring in outsiders. So that's always a real problem. In Nebraska, I think you can call the state education office and get some advice, and they may be able to provide you access to translators via telephone. Have kind of a three-way hookup there, you know. I'm really interested in integrity. I know Andy also mentioned this, that you're talking about shaky integrity. The teaching and the keys to excellent teaching integrity. Um, I'm interested in this because dealing with multicultural and stuff, it's easy to get lost in all the color and the food and stuff and not think that one of those issues, which somebody mentioned in here, maybe I'll be able to give you credit for, is that you're trying to teach integrity to kids and to respect others, not have to be like them, but to respect them. And that showing deference or showing respect for their belief system. You don't want people trashing their religion and saying, oh, the so-and-sos are terrorists. I think I saw that in there. Somebody had a kid say that certain group are terrorists. And that's because they had seen that from somebody on television. I'll let you guess who. So another one that was kind of interesting is, well, there's one about, Kim, you mentioned about games, Sudanese games. I would love to know if you could send me any information on games played in Sudan. I only know Mancala, and that's kind of a shepherd game, and it's very ancient, and I don't know if it's even played anymore. But the fact is, I have a whole collection of games that are from other countries, and I have Go. I have that one with, it's like Pente, which is an American game that was based on a foreign game where you have these little like discs or stones, and you try to surround other people with your stones. It sounds like a weird game, but it's actually a world famous game. Chess, obviously, you know, that originated in the Middle East. Parcheesi, versions of Parcheesi. I may show you that on video, these games. I have them locked up. But I bought some really nice copies of them, or, you know, really nice board games. I have Japanese chess, which is, you know, for Japanese, they know how to play the game, but it's the parts move differently and everything. Okay, any other things here? I think I mentioned the words, so words make a lot of difference. I hope I covered a lot of this. I just wanted to let you know that I appreciate your discussion, and I do go through and read all of it, and it's not very efficient, but I didn't want to just go through and reply individually to each one of you, because then I don't share some of the stuff, insights I get for the rest of you. So I may do these videos to some extent because I want to highlight important things. And I know you all don't read all of them and you don't respond to all of them. And when I print these out, at least I got 56 pages with a smaller print. That's a lot of reading. And I know I do some reading in textbooks, but not tons. Okay, well, that's my video for you, and I'm going to end this. And it actually recorded, and I'm not in my office, and my hair is almost combed.